Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Air Force Podcast. I'm your host, Tech Sergeant Billy O'Brien. Today we're going to be listening to part one of a two-part conversation with the first Guardian in space, Colonel Nick Hague. Hague will represent approximately 14,000 military and civilian Guardians who continue to support NASA in commercial missions in, from, and to space. Tech Sergeant Lance Valencia and Tech Sergeant Nick Katz caught up with him to talk about his previous experiences and what he's looking forward to most as he prepares for the journey. Once aboard the space station, Hague will transition to the role of flight engineer, where he and his crew will conduct a wide-ranging set of operations and research activities.
Welcome, sir.
Yeah, thank you. It's wonderful to be with you.
This is Sergeant Katz. He also is a Nick as well.
I've met Colonel Hague. I have a picture with Colonel Hague.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was at Space House. General Raymond introduced us.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and then also, I mean, Mrs. Colonel Hague was also our boss for a little while.
I do remember her, yes.
But down to the business end of this, sir. So you're going up soon. This is your second trip into space. What are you most excited for about this upcoming trip?
I get that question a lot. What are you looking forward to the most? And that is a super hard question to try to answer. If you just think about strapping yourself to a rocket, there's a lot of exhilaration and excitement and nervousness and anxiety that goes along with just riding a rocket into space. And then, once that 12-minute ride's over, then we're going to spend, over roughly 200 days up there on orbit. And that's going to be just... Living in space is just so different than living and working down here on the Earth. And so it's those little moments that you never predict that are the ones that I cherish the most when I think about what I was, my time up there previously. And getting to stare at the Earth is a pretty amazing vantage point.
Yeah, I could imagine. And could you give us an example of one of those like little moments you were just describing?
You've probably seen videos of astronauts playing with water.
Mm-hmm.
Just watching a small little sphere of water dance in front of you, and as the surface of that just kind of undulates, and then you start to play with it. You poke your finger into it, and rather than bouncing off like you kind of want it to do, because your mind just thinks it's a ball and it should bounce away, but it kind of just sticks to your finger like glue. And then when you try to pull your hand out of it, just like if you take your hand out of a tub of water, you don't expect the water in the tub to stick to your hand and follow it. And that ball of water just sticks to your finger and then starts to crawl up your finger because of surface tension. And so just these strange little ways that challenge your basic understanding of everything around you and how it behaves are just like little magical moments.
Wow. And does your brain ever adjust to that? Like, does it ever accept that, or does it always kind of feel surreal to you?
There are always the pinch me moments. I can't believe this is really happening, but you do adapt. And that was one of the amazing things is, I was launching last time in my 40s. You kind of have this picture of yourself having, spent 4 decades on this planet, having grown into your body, that you're kind of who you are and your body is what it is. And to go up there and to feel your body adapt to this new environment, physically adapt, your spine grows, your muscles start to get a little weak if you don't work out, the fluid in your body isn't pulled down to your feet, and so the pressure distribution in your body changes, and you feel all of these changes, but you also feel the shift mentally. At some point, my mind stops listening to my inner ear because it's confused. It can't decide which way is up and down, but my eyes can. So my mind just stops listening to my inner ear. Or the way you navigate through the space station stops being based on up and down and left and right. It's this 3-dimensional map, and your mind just makes this shift. So about 4 months into my 7-month mission last time, I felt this very distinct realization that all of a sudden my mind was predicting things to behave as if they were in microgravity, floating around, rather than predicting things to behave like they were on Earth under the influence of gravity, and then being surprised when they did something different. And it was a stark realization on the ground after I landed that, you know, when I would drop something, it fell, and my mind would think that that object was 600 pounds because it fell so quickly and so fast with such a thud, because my mind was expecting it to float. And it took a while for me to readapt back to Earth. So we're super adaptable, and that's just one of those fun experiences that you get, is going through that transformation up there and then going through it back down here on the Earth again.
Oh, wow.
That's crazy. It must be quite the interesting moment when you are kind of out of microgravity and back in the gravitational pull of Earth. What's that like? You know, when you land and you get out of your seat for the first time and you try to stand up back in gravity. What does that feel like?
Your body has never felt heavier. You feel like you're 4 or 5 times heavier than you should be, and it just takes effort to lift your arm. And then when you stand up, you're a little wobbly as long as your eyes are open. But as soon as you close your eyes, now really close after landing, I'm still not listening to my inner ear. So when I close my eyes, my body has no way to know how to stay upright. And so I just immediately fall over. And so you've got people that are holding on to you, but the body's amazing in how quickly it adapts. So I would take a nap. After I'd wake up for a nap, there would be some kind of step function improvement, this big leap in improvement in my mind readapting to the Earth. And so then over the course of a day and a half, I was able to walk unassisted, albeit a little wobbly. I was able to walk on my own and get to where I was at, and people weren't worried about me, falling over if I closed my eyes.
Does that give you any concerns for your future health at all?
Yeah, it is one of those things that we're studying. On the space station, we do a lot of experiments to try to really tease out, what happens when you take gravity out of things. And part of the things that we're trying to discover is what it does to the human body. And so last time around, I was subject to a couple dozen experiments where I was the guinea pig in the experiment. And this time around, it'll be very similar. And so we're studying all of those effects. And it's how we adapt on orbit, how we readapt to life under gravity, how we counteract those things so that they don't have long-term negative effects. But without doubt, these are questions we don't know the answers to. And we probably won't know until we have several. We don't fly people to space all that often. And to really make good scientific conclusions, you need a real big sample size. I need lots of test subjects. And so we're not going to know for a while, but we've got to start posing those questions and getting some initial data to figure it out.
Oh yeah, I could imagine. And how does that feel too, knowing that the experiments you were a guinea pig for, like you were saying, on that physical condition of the body and those future health concerns, and just knowing that one day that information will be used to help people do extended periods of times in space travel, maybe one day.
Yeah, and the job is a privilege, and it feels pretty good to be able to contribute in whatever small little way that may be. It might be just I'm a data point in an experiment, but hey, maybe that helps us draw some conclusions. And it doesn't just have to be for people that are flying in space or going to another planet. One of the big things we look at is bone loss. And so you're not under load on the space station continually like you are on the ground, and so your bones will naturally deteriorate, and so you lose bone mass while you're on orbit. And so a lot of the things that we're doing in terms of countermeasures are the same types of things that we can use for people that are recovering from injuries in hospitals that are bedridden, because they don't stand under load all the time. Or it could be applied to our older population, where as you get older, your bones naturally thin. And so there's a broad applicability for the things that we're researching up there.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it makes me think of, My granddad, his sister was married to a man, and he had polio. He's like one of I think probably the last people with polio and being bedridden like that. And I remember meeting him as a little kid, and they were talking about the withering away of his his body and also his bones specifically. And it's crazy that that's being worked in ways to mitigate up there in space with that information they're collecting. And Nick, I think you had something as well, right?
Yeah, it's just, I think what's really interesting, sir, and I was hoping maybe you can speak to it, is I think when people think of astronauts and they think of people in your shoes, I don't think they think a lot about the fact that, yeah, you're an astronaut, but really you're a scientist. You have to do so many different experiments while you're up there, outside of just the human body. But you guys do a whole bunch of other experiments with I think plants and studying space and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, that's the reason we're up there is to conduct all of those scientific experiments. When it's not focused on the human body, we're looking at how do we grow plants in space. Trips to Mars, trips to the moon. If we have permanent presence on the moon, those long trips to Mars, we're gonna have to figure out a way to sustain ourselves, and we can't send resupply missions every month or two like we do right now with the space station. So how do we grow food? It seems like a trivial thing to put a seed in some soil and pour water on it and give it some light and have it grow. But when there's no gravity, where does the plant know to grow to? How does it grow a root structure? How do you get the water to the roots if I don't have gravity to pull water down through the soil? And so those are fundamental mechanisms that we're trying to understand so that we can eventually grow high enough yield to sustain people long-term in space. We do some really crazy experiments, and calling me a scientist, I'm flattered, but I have colleagues that are astronauts that are scientists. I would consider myself more of a lab technician in that I have the privilege of being the hands and the eyes and the ears of the scientist in the space station, but the brain trust is on the ground. And I never imagined that I was going to hook up a 3D printer that was designed to print human tissues and eventually human organs so that they could be sent back down to be used in transplants. I never imagined that I'd be, pipetting and sequencing DNA and using CRISPR technology to do gene editing on orbit. That was never in, I'm an astronautical engineer. Those were things I never imagined I'd be doing. And so it's fun to get involved with that. And it's even more fun to be tied on the radio with those scientists and to hear the excitement in their voice when you're doing one of these experiments that may only last a couple minutes, but they've been working a decade trying to get to the point where they could pose that question and collect that data. It's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. I think one of the things that I'm really interested in, I think a lot of people are too, sir, is, with this being your second trip up, if I believe right, you're not going up on a Soyuz this time. You're going to go up on a Dragon capsule. Is that correct?
I am. So we'll launch on a Crew Dragon. Our mission is NASA's Crew 9 mission, scheduled to launch in the latter part of August and go up for a roughly 6-month stay aboard the space station. Same mission as last time, just a different means of getting to and from the space station.
What's that been like? Because from what I've seen, I'm a big space nerd, and I like watching all the videos and seeing the difference between the Crew Dragon compared to the Soyuz spacecraft itself. It looks like you got a little bit more leg room on this trip.
There is quite a bit more room on the interior. It's a night and day. It's fun. I'm an engineer, so it's fun to see the same problem. I got to get people from the surface of the Earth to the space station, and to see the two dramatically different approaches that we're taking to get there. And SpaceX being, they've been flying, Roscosmos, Russia's been flying Soyuz for decades. And so there's a long history of spiral improvement and slowly making that vehicle what it is today. And then you've got SpaceX that is relatively new by comparison, and they've been able to start with a clean sheet and incorporate, some of the latest technology from the get-go. And it's a joy to ride in both. I'm looking forward to the real ride rather than simulated rides in Dragon, and looking forward to seeing what the Falcon 9 rocket feels like as it's hurtling off the pad.
Yeah, and before that launch and during, is there any moments that you have that like make you nervous specifically?
Yeah, I'd say we spend roughly 95% of our training focused on what to do when something goes wrong. And so the mentality that you develop is, and this on my previous launches, the mentality is I'm always thinking in the moment right now, what is the next thing that could go wrong? What's the next worst thing that could go wrong, and how would we respond to it? And so you're constantly thinking about all these negative things as you're experiencing, I'd argue one of the most spectacular experiences you could have. But you're in that bubble and you're focused on doing the job. And it's, it's all due to that training program that we're a product of, and the hard work of the, teams of thousands that are that training program to get us ready for that day. So in terms of nervous, the biggest nerves are, I just don't want to make a mistake. Everybody, there's a lot of people that have invested their time, their blood, sweat, and tears, their lives into training crews to be successful. And so I think predominantly crews just don't want to make mistakes, but we're human. And so then figuring out how to work together as a crew so that when somebody makes a mistake, we can recover together as a team and then still be successful is what it's all about.
This concludes part one. Thank you so much for listening. Please join us next time for the conclusion of our conversation with Colonel Nick Hague.
The Air Force Podcast. The Air Force Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Air Force Podcast. I'm your host, Tech Sergeant Billy O'Brien. Today, we're going to be listening to the second part of a conversation my colleagues Tech Sergeant Lance Valencia and Tech Sergeant Nick Ketz had with the first Guardian in space, Colonel Nick Hague. Although this is the first Guardian on a space mission, this is nothing new for the Department of Defense and NASA, as roughly 2/3 of NASA astronauts have served in the United States Armed Forces.
I think something that's also really unique about this trip for you, sir, is, this is your second time into orbit, but this is your first time going up as a Guardian. And you get to be that flag bearer for the Space Force as the first Guardian into orbit and into space to continue to push that service, into the future. What does that feel like to have that accomplishment?
I feel really privileged to have the opportunity specifically to launch from the U.S. Because it gives me an opportunity to cast a broader spotlight on everything that Guardians do to make human spaceflight possible. I think the average person might not understand that human spaceflight doesn't exist if Guardians aren't doing what they do on a day-to-day basis. Whether it's launching us into space, and the range support that we get there, or it's tracking or navigation, or all, I could go on and on about everything that happens, but I can tell you that if the Space Force and its Guardians and U.S. Space Command are not doing their jobs, we don't explore space. All the good that comes from human space exploration doesn't happen. And so my sole goal in this mission, if I could accomplish one thing, is to let every Guardian feel that connection to the magic that is human spaceflight.
And can you connect some of those dots for us of the Guardian to that actual spaceflight?
Yeah. Let me think of one that seems fairly routine these days. The space station is roughly 250 miles above the Earth, low Earth orbit, and it's zipping around, and there's a lot of stuff up there these days. Every Starlink launch, there's more and more stuff up there. I mean, there's a lot of satellites, and then there's even more debris. And NASA doesn't track the debris. right? It's Guardians stationed around the globe that are generating that picture of the space domain and letting us know, hey, there's a potential conjunction here. And then they let us know, and they provide us that data, and then we make a judgment call. Is it coming close enough? Do we need to move out of the way? And if we need to, we move the station. And that's a fairly routine thing that we do. We reboost not just to maintain the orbit of the station, we reboost to get out of the way of debris. That, whether they realize it or not, they're saving our lives on a fairly routine basis. And so, you've probably all seen the maps of the 50 to 60,000 things orbiting the Earth, and it looks like this cloud around the Earth. Well, there's a few of those dots that have people living on them. And one of them has been continually inhabited for over almost 2.5 decades now. And that's only possible because of that protection that we've been afforded throughout history by Guardians.
That's awesome, sir. That's a great way to describe that. That really could be like a specialist in the Space Force, telling you that, hey, there might be a piece of debris and to move out of the way. Something else we're a little bit curious about is, the partnership with NASA. That seems like such an interesting partnership where we're taking, NASA and then combining them with, a military service. What has that partnership been like, for your career in astronautics?
Yeah, it's been fun to be part of both of those organizations and to live in that overlap. I can tell you that the missions are distinctly different. NASA has a civil space mission, and it is trying to answer the big questions of why are we here, how things work, and to push us further into space to get data to answer that and to help humanity expand into space. And the Space Force mission is focused on protecting that domain. So they're complementary in that the relationship I kind of spoke about before. Space Force builds that foundation of stability, the foundation of protection, if you will, that allows NASA to do its civil space mission. They don't exist without each other in that they are complementary. And it's an agreement between DoD and NASA that allows me the opportunity to be assigned to NASA and be a NASA astronaut as an active duty military member. We've got representatives from all the services as part of the Corps, and there's no requirement to have DoD astronauts. We compete, we just closed this most recent application window, and I've heard that there were lots of Guardians that applied, so I've got a big smile on my face right now to be part of that next astronaut class. There's no quota. So NASA really just looks at it and says, hey, we're going to pick the best people we can find. If they happen to be in the military, then we're still going to pick them, and we have agreements in place that'll still allow them to come and represent their country and be part of this amazing mission. And so it's been fun to see those two missions overlap, those two cultures overlap. And I think that, a unique perspective that I have is I know there's so much that we have to learn from each other through the ways that we each have conducted our own business over the course of the years. And those best practices, if we can cross-pollinate those best practices, I think both organizations end up becoming better.
Yeah, for sure. And talking about some of those Guardians applying to be astronauts, that just got me thinking, like, for the young Guardians out there today who have that dream to be an astronaut, what would you tell them?
Yeah. The first thing you can do is you can look at, well, what's it take? So the minimum requirements, you need to have a STEM master's. So you've got to get an education. You've got to get a master's degree, and it's got to be in a STEM field. You've got to have 2 years of applicable work experience after that. And then you've got to be healthy. That last one is somewhat in your control and somewhat out of your control, right? Genetics and things happen that may or may not medically disqualify you, but you got to stay fit. And so you got to take care of yourself physically and mentally as you go along your path. So that's the minimum requirements. So it's not a super high hurdle. Beyond that, we're really looking for people that are like these amazing teammates, because it's a team sport. And so do you participate in small teams? Do you get along with other people well? Do you know how to resolve conflict? We focus a lot on like these softer skills of interpersonal relationships, and how do you foster cohesion and camaraderie amongst a team, and how do you come to conflict resolution? And so we look at that. But then we also look, hey, how do you operate in high stress environments? How do you handle time constrained problem solving? And how do you do that as part of a team? And so when I think about it, I think, Guardians are in an amazing position, not only just to demonstrate the job, because the missions are separate between NASA and the Space Force, but the skill set, operating control room, managing satellites, using all of that same technology, it's the same skill set. So working on an ops floor is the same as working in MCC. So you're demonstrating you can do the job. You work in small teams, so you've got the opportunity to hone those skills. And then just in general, the military affords you so many opportunities to expand and push yourself into these austere, remote, challenging environments to further develop your ability to operate in those, time-constrained, high-pressure, high-risk kind of activities. So I think Guardians, if they put their mind to it, they've got all the tools at the ready to be able to work toward that goal.
That's awesome to hear. I think that really puts a lot of an interesting perspective to it. I think for a lot of us, when we hear like, oh, you're an astronaut, you're like, wow, I could never be an astronaut. That sounds like a hurdle that I would never be able to get over. But the way that you explain that does make it seem like, if you really put your mind to it and things can work out your way, you could be, an astronaut. I think what we kind of want to do now is we're going to just shift a couple of the questions more towards, while you're in space. We were thinking about a couple of these, and I think these some of these questions are a little more the gee whiz. When Lance and I sat down to kind of talk about them, we're like, man, what are some of these questions that, like, if we could just talk to an astronaut for a couple of minutes, what would you ask? And I think one of them for me is, obviously the meal situation up there is a little bit different because of how, from what I've read and seen, and how you guys receive your meals in space. Is there ever a time that you've been on the ground that you're like kind of excited to get back into space because there's like a certain space meal that you missed? Or is it just like, what, while we're there, it's great, but happy to be back with regular food?
I am one voice out of the astronaut corps, so you may have different opinions. I think astronauts are like doctors. If you've got 3 of them together, you might have 10 different opinions. So I've deployed, I've had to eat MREs, and when I get home, I don't necessarily get a hankering for MREs.
Yeah. Is there like a certain condiment that it like is like the thing while you're up there? Like everybody's like, oh, I gotta have that, otherwise we're not surviving for the 7 months we're up here.
It ebbs and flows, and so just to describe the menu to you a little bit. So some of the things that we have up there are taken straight out of the MRE portfolio that's on the ground. Other stuff is added to it. So we end up with about 200 different meal items, and we work with nutritionists to make sure that it's fairly balanced. Some of it is irradiated, some of it, so you just warm it up. Some of it is dehydrated, so you have to add water and let it rehydrate. Some of it is just vacuum sealed. So, you can get if you wanted a package of peanuts, there's vacuum sealed peanuts up there. So there's great variety. And then you also have the ability to kind of swap with some of the international. So the Russians have their own food. And so hey, I'm going to give you some of mine, you give me some of yours. And so you can continue to expand that variety. But the things that are in low commodity or become the cherished things are the ones that everybody likes. And your taste kind of changes up there. There's all kinds of different explanations. I'm not sure anybody really knows. So when you get up on orbit, when you're on the ground, let's start on the ground. When you're on the ground, your heart is pumping and it's trying to overcome gravity. So it pushes blood harder to your head than it does your feet. When you get on orbit, your heart doesn't know you're on orbit. And so it keeps pumping blood harder to your head than your feet. And so the pressure in your head goes up more than you're used to. And so it feels like you've got a head cold. And your body adapts to it a little bit. But in general, I felt like I always had a little bit of sinus congestion up there, just that extra pressure in my head. And then, you think about a head cold, you get a sinus, all that stuff's in there. It kind of mutes your sense of taste. And so people will say that you kind of have this muted sense of taste up there. So something that traditionally is in hot commodity are any kind of hot sauces where you can add a little more kick to the food because it gets bland over time. So sriracha sauce, Tabasco sauce, Cholula, any of that stuff we can get up there, and you just, douse it on to your heart's content until it runs out. And if everybody's doing it, it runs out fast.
What is your go-to hot sauce?
Yeah, now I'm just curious.
Go-to hot sauce. In general, it's up there. It was sriracha sauce because that's what we had. Down here, a little bit of Tabasco, but typically I'm not putting a whole lot of hot sauce on because I'm just adding like grilled peppers to things. Give me a habanero, or let's grill out some poblanos and chop that stuff up and put it in. You just can't do that up there. So we resort instant heat.
Instant heat. While you're up there too, I don't know if it's changed. I think the last big documentary I had seen was from a while ago from one of the Canadian astronauts on communicating with home. Do you get to call home a lot? Is there, can you FaceTime? Is it just email, phone calls? Is it a radio that you have to use? How do you keep in touch with the family back here on Earth while you're up there?
You have amazing connectivity to your family. So there's a constellation of satellites that sit up in GEO called TDRS. That's our NASA's tracking and relay satellites. And so we have almost like a 90 to 95% constant contact with that. And so we've got, S-band and so the ability to talk and to stream video is just beyond what. So I first deployed to Iraq back in 2003 and was having to, get my sporadic once a week kind of phone call at the queue in the tent. And when I think about that and the amount of separation there was during that type of deployment, and now when I can get on my computer, I've got a dedicated link. I can dial up an IP phone and call home pretty much anytime I want to, and check in at home. And the delay on the communications is almost imperceptible. It's pretty amazing. And then each weekend we'll set up dedicated times to do video conferences with the family. So that's just like doing, Zoom or Skype or FaceTime. And it's real time back and forth. You can stay. My wife complained that I called her more from orbit than I did while I was in training. And basically she said, stop calling so much. We've got stuff to do down here.
Oh, that's good. And do y'all have like any family traditions that y'all do like while you're up there, and that you plan to keep doing? As ways to just to feel close, because calling's good. But are there anything that y'all are doing, like I said, that helps y'all, it helps you feel closer to home?
Yeah, so little things to help mark the passage of time. We get care packages. So the family has the ability to send stuff up, and I've got very limited ability to send stuff down, and there's usually a very long lead time associated with that. So that's, maybe once or twice during the time that I'm up there, there'll be an opportunity to pass a note and send it down, or to have them send up something. I remember getting a package of Christmas cards from all of my relatives, and so I was able to open Christmas cards. We did some little things. So my boys are bigger now. They're still not out of high school, but they were littler the last time around 5 years ago. And so one of the things we did to help mark the passage of time is, before I left, I gave them the Millennium Falcon Lego set, that really big one that's got like 7,500 pieces. And I said, okay, start building it the day I leave, and let's see if you can get done before I get back. And so then they would just share the progress as they were going, snap pictures and tell me about how it was going. And when I got back, they had saved the antenna dish to stick on top of it, but it was done. So you find ways to connect, but in some regards, it's like any military deployment that you're going to be part of. Back home, they've got their lives to live, and I think my wife, although she was joking somewhat, she was pretty spot on in that, hey, you've got your mission to do, we've got our mission to do, and we'll stay in sync and we'll stay in touch so we know how we're doing, but we're going to do those things, and then we'll reintegrate when you get back here, and then you can tell us all about it.
Oh man, yeah, what a rock star of a spouse right there.
Sure.
That is amazing. And that has kind of got me thinking. Earlier you were speaking about the amount of camaraderie and teammanship that they're looking for. NASA's looking for when deciding on who they want to be an astronaut. And knowing you have all that deployment experience coming from the military background, were you able to mentor some of your teammates in that separation and how to deal with it?
Yeah, it's a constant challenge, and it ultimately is, how do you make yourself resilient? How do you make your family resilient? And those are things I think we tend to think about it when in the deployed setting, but those are skills and things you need to do every day. Whether you're separated or not, and it all starts, fundamentally it starts with just aggressive, open, candid communication. You can never over communicate enough with your significant others, and you're always just, hey, what are our priorities? How am I feeling? And you're sharing that, and you're working together, and that's just reinforcing that supportive environment, and that's the bedrock that everything gets built off of. And so as long as you're just talking to each other, then you can figure out how to get through, not only figure out how to get through things, but do it well and know that as you're going through them, you've got somebody on your wing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I got one more question before I'll pass it over to Nick to wrap this thing up. And this is just coming from the most enlisted of mindsets right now. What's that per diem like up there?
Well, okay. So if you go through per diem rules, government transportation is provided, and all government meals are provided. So believe it or not, I do file a travel voucher to low Earth orbit.
Oh, wow.
And the only thing that comes out of that travel voucher is the incidental meals and expenses daily rate. I think it's $5 a day or something like that. So that is my bonus pay for going to space. I get an extra $5 a day.
Oh, wow, that's great. All right, yeah, Nick, I'll pass it on to you now.
Well, sir, we definitely appreciate the time. It's always great to get a chance to sit down and chat, especially with somebody that has meant a lot, not only to the Space Force, but also to the Air Force as well. You've meant a lot to the Department of the Air Force, both services. We want to wish you the absolute best of luck on your travels. we'll definitely be here watching. We're really excited for you. And we're just going to give you a chance before we sign off. Is there anything else that, you wanted to add or something that maybe we should have asked you?
No, it's been great to chat with you guys. I'm just going to foot stomp. I want everybody to feel connected. There may be only 4 people in a capsule launching into space, but there are massive teams on the ground that make that possible. The easy team to think about is the one in the Mission Control Center or the Launch Control Center that's actively working the rocket and the capsule or managing the space station. There's the training teams that are associated with that. And then if you open that aperture even further, and that's really what I hope everybody understands, is when you expand that circle, Guardians should find themselves inside that circle. They're connected to every one of these launches where we're sending people into space and we're discovering things that are going to benefit all of humanity. And they should feel pride in that and never feel like that something like that is out of reach.
Colonel Hague docked at the International Space Station September 29th. For the 5-month mission, he will be participating in a variety of research projects for NASA's Human Research Mission. Each study is designed to help address the health challenges that astronauts may face during future long-duration missions to the Moon, Mars, and beyond.